settle in. Hey everybody, thanks for coming back. We are now in the last stage of my 2021 recap. We will be talking about the video games I have played and completed this year, or the previous year. Well, some of them I've just completed, but I'm rolling them into that, mostly because one of them's an older game anyway. But, now, the thing with video games is that I don't have a lot of time to play them over the years, so the fact that I actually completed as many as I did is kind of crazy, although a couple of them I haven't completed. I haven't been playing as many of the big releases as much as the smaller ones, just because that's what I have time to play more of. So yeah, we'll go through that. I do have a couple of big ones, and we'll go from there. Let's start with just a couple of quick honorable mentions, because while I played through them last year, they've been around a lot longer than that. The first one being Bendy and the Ink Machine. Bendy and the Ink Machine is a really interesting game stylistically. Gameplay, it is fairly simplistic as a first-person experience. The combat is pretty meh, but it's more about the story it is trying to tell. It is about a former animator at a Disney-type studio going back to said studio because he got a message from his former partner saying he needed to show him something, and then a bunch of scary, creepy things happening after that. And it's all done in a sepia, black and white kind of style, and all of the visuals are done in a very kind of, although 3D, they're a very cartoony, old school animation, black and white, sepia style visuals. A very cool little game. The ending is weird in the way that it's like, wait, what just happened? I feel like I need to play through it again because there is an aspect of it that's unlocked on a second playthrough. But it's a game that's good to play through because it's interesting artistically more than it is an overall good game. But I do recommend it, like I said, just because it is artistically interesting. The other one I will say right away is Return of the Obra Dinn, which is absolutely incredible. It is another one that is... Can you not right now, Riff? Obra Dinn is another one that artistically is interesting, as well as being a very, very cool game. The premise is you are, hello again, you are a insurance adjuster in the late 1800s? Early 1800s? I can't remember, the mid 1800s? It's in the 1800s, I believe. And a ship that was traveling between Europe and Africa disappeared and has been found, and there are no survivors on board. And it is your job as an insurance adjuster, essentially, to figure out what happened to all the crew, how it happened, and the fates of every single crew on board, which is about, I think it was 60 different people. Now, the way you do that is you are given a stopwatch that essentially, if you find a body, it brings you back to the moment of their death, and sometimes can chain to other deaths that also happened at the same time. And then, so through various context clues and what the people say, you hear the audio of a few seconds leading up to their deaths. Through those context clues, you have to figure out who they are, how they died, and what caused it. What or who caused it. Yeah, it is an incredible piece of game design. I cannot recommend it enough. Me and my wife played through it together as a, co-puzzle solving thing, and it was incredibly fun to play that way. Playing it with a group is fun, especially having, multiple eyes on the same thing. People will see things that the other ones don't. And there are some incredibly clever ways that you have to figure out who some of the people are. Could not recommend that one more. Return of the Obra Dinn is an incredible little game. Okay, so that's some of the older ones. We'll start going through, kind of decide as I go how I want to approach this. We'll go with a couple of the ones I got first this year. Technically, these both came out last year because they were PlayStation 5 releases, but I got them this last year, so I'm going to talk about them as a part of this recap. So the first one being Demon's Souls. So the remake of the original Demon's Souls on the PS3, that was the progenitor of all of the Souls-like games, now mostly equated with Dark Souls. But Demon's Souls is the first of those. So this was a ground-up remake with completely new visuals, some quality of life improvements, and big visual upgrades. I really enjoyed this game. I've always enjoyed the Souls-like, but I always kind of hit a wall with them, so I never finished them. So this is the first one I've actually finished. I actually started it, I think, twice back on the PlayStation 3, but never got too far. I think I got most of the way into the second area. This time it was like, I am committed, I'm going to finish this. And it is really, really good. Although, like I said, there are some small things that I would definitely have done differently. I think some of the difficulty spikes in a few of the areas are really ridiculous. I have heard some of that is mitigated by different playstyles. I was a knight and stuck very closely to sword and shield style, which I've heard is not necessarily the best way to play the game, but I definitely felt more comfortable with that. And some of the areas just it's like you had to get lucky to get through them, even with like good setups. You'd go through an area and you could wipe out a whole bunch of enemies, and then they throw one enemy at you who is so far beyond overpowered that there was no way getting past them. A lot of times you had to learn how to avoid them. That would be my only major complaint. That, and sometimes the distance you had to cover in a single area could be a little bit much, which is a complaint I also have with Dark Souls, is sometimes the distance between campfires is a little bit much. But, you know, going back and playing the first of this series, this is where it all came from, and finally finishing it and feeling that joy of being like, yes, I defeated this very difficult game was great. I really enjoyed it. It's not as good as Dark Souls, but if you're hankering for a Souls-like that is on the modern consoles, it's definitely a good option. The other big day one release for the PlayStation 5 that I actually played through, I have a couple that I haven't gotten to yet, specifically like Sackboy and stuff like that, but Rocket's joining me now. The other big one that I got that I did actually play through is Spider-Man Miles Morales. Now, I hadn't actually finished the original Spider-Man up to that point. It's once I heard that this was getting a re-release. I was a little bit of the way into the PS4 version of Spider-Man, and I decided to just forgo that and wait until the re-release came out so I could get the updated visuals, which I think was worth it personally, but then again, I'm also kind of a fidelity head. The Spider-Man itself is a great game. It's probably the best feeling Spider-Man game that I've ever played. Storyline was great. It definitely worth your time. It does feel a little bit last gen with how it functions structurally, which is a big problem that a lot of games right now are having, especially Insomniac games, which I'll get to later. But other than that, it is a very good version of what that is. Miles Morales, on the other hand, is a lot more of the same. While they do add in some new abilities that change gameplay in some fun ways, like genuinely, his electrical powers are really fun to play with. The story was good. For a shorter tale, it's nice to see Miles Morales get his due after where the last one left off, and I'm curious to see what they're going to do with the sequel, because you know it's coming, because that game sold like gangbusters. It was very good. A lot of it was just more of the same. If you liked the first one, you're going to like Miles Morales. It's also very good. They do some fun things with playing with the aftermath of the previous game, specifically with how Kingpin's stuff is left at the end after the end of the last one, but generally speaking, it's a lot more of the same gameplay as the last one. You'll enjoy it if you've played Spider-Man. Alright, next on the list, what should I go to next? Snax was also an early release on PlayStation 5. Snax was a big ol' almost game. It is just fine. The general concept is great. It's incredibly funny while also being pretty dark. The premise of Snax being that you are sent to this island to figure out what happened to this famous explorer as a journalist. And when you get there, you find out that the crew have all various things have happened and that explorer did disappear. The big thing to say is that everybody are like these Muppet-like characters. It's very cartoony. And they're on this island that is populated by a thing called Snax, which are these little, or I shouldn't even say little, a lot of them are pretty big, these bugs that are shaped like food. And so your whole goal of the game is to catch all the Snax, like every type, and then catch specific ones for specific of the characters who are back at the camp, basically all part of the expedition that the explorer that you're there to find was on. While the basic setup is pretty silly, and a lot of the Snax themselves are pretty silly as well, the actual story they tell goes to some pretty dark places. Especially the ending is very dark. You're talking about characters who are dealing with, as you find out as you're completing tasks for them, they're dealing with feelings of inadequacy or abandonment or problems with their marriage, and you have to figure out how to help them work through some of those issues. The stories themselves are very, very well written. The big problem is that the overall gameplay is pretty weak. You have a handful of tools that you can use to figure out how to catch the various Snax, but the problem being that is you learn a couple of specific tactics for how to use them, and beyond that, there's not really a whole lot that goes into catching the various bug snacks themselves. The puzzle solving gets pretty easy pretty quickly, and so it's just kind of going through the motions, although sometimes some of the tactics you have to use are obvious but are difficult to pull off is the worst that it could be. But yeah, once you figure out a handful of tactics, you basically complete the entire game with those. That's the only major problem, is that the story's good, but the gameplay is just kind of blah. After a certain point, it's just kind of going through the motions over and over again. Although you still are driven to figure out what's going on with the storyline, especially as it gets weirder and darker as it goes. But it is fine. It's worth a playthrough. It's not very long. I think I completed it in 8 hours, like 100%. But yeah, you don't really need to go out of your way for it. Let's see, The Medium. I actually did a review of this already. Actually, I did a review of Bugsnax as well. The Medium is a really interesting game. My big problem is that the thing that they set up as the big deal with this game was the ability to, which is a technically impressive feat, but they made it feel like you could do it whenever, when it really only happens at specific points in the game. Overall, it feels like a run-of-the-mill PS3 mystery game. The gameplay isn't very complicated, and much of the puzzle solving is really just go to this place and pick up this thing, or use this specific ability in this place. It feels very last gen or last gen, but when it does do interesting things, those things are very interesting. Like, they do play with some of the stealth tactics you have to use in some interesting ways, but it's few and far between where that actually happens. But the story it tells, however, is very mature and very well done, and by the time you get to the end, all the twists that happen in the last hour and a half of the game all feel very earned and very cool. It's stylistically really interesting. It also just feels like it needed one more act to really flesh out the story, but even without that, it still felt like a complete game. It's definitely worth playing at least once. You just have to know that you're not getting, like, because they were touting it as like the first truly next-gen game for Xbox, like it wasn't getting released on old-gen systems because it couldn't work on old systems, but it still felt like an older game. I'd love to see a sequel. We'll see if we can get it. Bloober Team's output is a little bit weird. I do recommend their first game, Layers of Fear, highly, but yeah, this one was a little bit in between. So, The Medium was good. I do recommend that one. However, Maneater, I don't. The Maneater is the victim of being a game with an incredibly fun concept, but with the most mind-numbingly repetitive controls that it isn't fun. You're playing as a shark whose mother is killed, and then you're basically going through this area and hunting down people and becoming a bigger and better shark as you go along, while also trying to hunt down the people who hunted down your mother. And the general premise is great. It's super funny. The cutscenes are hilarious. The nature doc voiceover in it is also just impeccable. It's just the overall gameplay is just, it's a lot of literally just press this button, press that button, mash, 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 press this button, press that button, mash, 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 mash. It got so repetitive that I got about a third of the way into the game and I had to put it down and never went back because it wasn't fun. I know some people disagree with me on that, but big non-recommendation on Maneater. It's too repetitive. The style just does not make up for the lack of content. And I've heard it gets better as it goes along and you get more abilities, but yeah, I just couldn't do it. The Artful Escape is really cool. That is, you are a guitarist in this small mountain town that is known for basically being the birthplace of a Bob Dylan type. And you are actually the grandnephew of this guy, and everybody expects you to be exactly like him, but he actually wants to be a spacey electronic guitarist who then is pulled on an adventure across space and time in a giant concert series along with another famous intergalactic musician. It's a bizarre game, and ultimately the gameplay is a combination of these essentially walking simulator 2D moving across a space, which is beautifully well done. You kind of play music as you go along and do this basic platforming, and then these Simon match the music and color moments. That being said, the story it tells is really, really interesting, and it is beautifully made, and is definitely worth your time just to experience the story as it goes along. Surprising little game, good, highly recommended. But just know that it is very simplistic in its actual gameplay, and it's more about the visuals and the story that it's telling than the actual gameplay. Carrion Carrion was a fun little game. So Carrion is like the game version of the movie The Thing, but you're playing as the Thing. Basically, you're just this massive alien flesh, and you're going through this lab facility and trying to escape and eating and consuming everything you can along the way. The gameplay is pretty basic. It's mostly traversal with a couple of, you have a couple of basic movement-based attacks that you have to use against enemies that have machine guns and can actually kill you. And then occasionally doing puzzle solving where you have to either increase or reduce the amount of flesh that you have, your size. And then some interesting backstory and environmental storytelling that could lead to a bigger story moving forward. I hope it did enough to justify a sequel, because the ending leaves some big unanswered questions. Specifically, the world that it is set in throughout the game seems to be one thing, and then you get out of the facility and it's a very different situation. Carrion was a lot of fun. It's a nice easy one. You can beat it in about 4 hours. It's a good time. Especially, I believe it's still on Xbox Game Pass, which, definitely get it on that, which Artful Escape is as well. Seriously, if you have an Xbox or a PC and you don't have Game Pass, get it. It is many people say it, but it really is the best deal in gaming, and you get so many games first day for free, and as long as you play through a couple of them on a regular basis, it's more than worth the price. Monster Train. Monster Train I played a little bit of. I kind of want to get back to it at some point. It is a roguelite deck builder. So you're literally on a train through hell, and you're slowly building up your deck and increasing the power of your deck as you're going along, and the idea is to get to the other end of hell so you can escape, while outside forces are attacking your train. And it is very good. It is very good at what it does. It was very fun. Deck builders I appreciate the quality, but I can't get into the meta enough to really get very good at them. So I appreciated it, and I'd like to get back to it at some point, but we will see. And there's another deck builder I need to talk about that I could not recommend more, but it's a very specific recommendation, but we'll get to that later. Next, I'll talk about Tetris Effect. I've had Tetris Effect technically since last year, but it got a re-release on Xbox, so I'm going to talk about it anyway. Tetris Effect is arguably the best Tetris game, period. Stop it. Stop. Mechanically, Tetris Effect is one of the best feeling Tetris games in years. It's missing some of the mechanics that I've liked in other versions of it, but other than that, as the base game, it's good. The major difference is that it adds the Tetris Effect, which is it slows down and stops the game, and then you build up a larger Tetris in a certain amount of time, and you get a bonus based on how many lines you can clear in that time. That's the only major difference. And then the other one, just on top of that, is it's beautiful. The music and visuals are next level. It is the best feeling Tetris game probably ever. So cannot praise that enough. The original one on PlayStation 5 or PlayStation 4 is compatible with VR, and it is incredibly fun to play in that style. So I do recommend that as well. Getting the full experience of being wrapped in Tetris is very cool, and I do highly recommend playing it that way if you get a chance. But the Xbox version is also very good, and not something to be passed up if you're a Tetris fan at all.
And Side 1.